LinkedIn echo chamber. This is ML's like Team Spirit. Will is back with us. Will, how are you doing?
Very good, thanks, John. How are you?
Really good. Still in your cube in Bristol?
Still in my cube in Bristol. Yeah.
Good for
Clouds
you.
haven't cleared up yet.
Yeah, right. Well, Will, hey, I've got videos coming out or have come out. Everyone's interested in generative AI. And there
Mm,
was something I was talking to you about only a few weeks ago, which inspired this talk. So we were on a call, catching up, and I said to you, "Hey, Will, OpenAI have just released the GPT store." And I was
mm,
like, "Guess what? There's 3 million GPTs on the day of release," um, which really caught my eye. So this video is not about how do they do that, um, but it is about how to build your own GPT, and specifically in the area of what's called fine tuning a language
mm.
model. So I wanted someone to come on and talk about, why you would do that, what's involved in doing that, um, and probably take the story on from there. Like, how do you know you've even done something good? So everyone knows, OpenAI have services where you can fine tune on top of GPT-4 and 3 and 2 and 1 and all of these things. So they've opened that capability to the world. Um, Quickly got to a critical mass of 3 million, which still don't know how they've done this, but there we go. But I would like some insight as to how it all works, please. So I know that the key mechanism is known as fine tuning. I wondered if you could help my audience understand, like, why would you do it? What is it? And take us through this, please.
Well, I suppose we should start with the the premise that you probably shouldn't do it, at least for
Oh,
most of the use
controversial.
cases
Yes.
that you've got. So, the language models are great for building things like uh, chatbots, for example. um, or for some kind of producing documents or summarizing documents, those kinds of things. Anything where you've got a lot of text and you need to search through it and produce some outputs and summarize them, they're great for that. Anything where you want to interact with someone and have it sort of improve your own writing or whatever. So we all know what the use cases are. Okay, and the fact is that you can make an application putting the GPT on rails, forcing it to interact with you in a certain way. And you can do this all without touching the model itself. So there's a bunch of techniques you can use. One's called retrieval augmented generation, which is where when you ask the language model a question, first of all, it goes and searches in a database to find all the relevant information that might help it answer your particular question. And then it's kind of up front, let's say at the forefront of its memory, and it uses that to produce the answer. Another thing you can do is actually control the flow, the way the language model produces outputs. So you can ask it to produce you an output, and then you can take that output and you can ask it to reflect upon it or break it apart or break it down into steps or expand on a certain step. So you can kind of have a control flow around that, and you can get it to produce you some very sophisticated end results simply by kind of feeding the outputs back into the inputs, augmenting the inputs, that kind of thing. Putting guardrails around it, super important, checking what it's produced, maybe asking it to verify the facts that it's produced, maybe actually
So,
looking
Will,
up any links it
the
gives you,
inputs
that
and the
sort of thing.
outputs, can a regular person be thinking, you're talking about a systematic way of really using the prompt?
Mm,
Is that right? So you're
yeah, yeah,
really
yeah,
in
exactly.
smaller chunks, adding further detail and sort of building up from there, rather than one massive request of, like, is the answer 42? You're kind of doing something highly iterative. Is that right?
You can do, yeah, you can do it iteratively. So kind of control the loop. And this kind of application, and there are tools out there to help you build them, doesn't really require you to understand the internals of the language model at all, and can get you very far, can solve a lot of use cases for you. So I guess the answer to your first question about fine tuning is, well, probably for many use cases, you don't have to do that. You just got to write a good application.
Yeah, well, that's not what OpenAI want. So they want everyone to fine tune and use their services. So and they've got 3 million of them out of the gate.
Yeah.
So this is their core offering. What what are they asking people to do then when they say, fine tune our GPT? What are they really asking for here, or how does it really work?
Yeah. So I guess the question really here is like, why would you do it if you can
Mhm.
do so much without actually touching the language model in the first
My
place?
question too. My question too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a few reasons that you might want to. So one of them is that you have a use case which relies on a lot of data that you hold that the GPT has never seen. So let's imagine that you are an agency and you write content for people, and you have a particular voice or style that you use, or a particular format for the outputs you produce. And you hold hundreds or thousands of examples of your own content, and what you want is a GPT to help you do a first draft of new content. Okay? It doesn't know the tone of voice for your agency because it's not actually seen all of your private data. So another example would be, let's imagine you're a company and you've got an IT team and you've written your own libraries for coding, okay? And everyone internally uses these libraries to do whatever they've got to do. A good example of this is NVIDIA, who recently actually trained their own large language model, particularly to solve this problem. They had their own coding libraries. What they wanted was a chatbot that could assist their coders in writing good code using their own languages and libraries. Again, the GPT hadn't seen any of this stuff in its training data, and so it wasn't able to help them produce the scripts that their engineers needed to produce. For both of those use cases, that's a really good um, reason to want to explore fine tuning. Fine tuning takes a few forms, but fundamentally it means having really well curated private data of your own and updating the actual behavior of the model by continuing to train it across your data. And the hope is that by the end of this process, it is able to produce outputs of the form that you want. And this kind of takes a few different forms, but fundamentally that's it.
So let's move forward on the content one, because I worked in marketing 20 years, Will. Content creation and using AI to make that go faster is pretty much all I see in my LinkedIn feed, which is why I'm doing these videos. But so you'd have a library of your own content. So this is why you'd have a bunch of content that's representative of your brand. Um, I suppose that would capture all of these things marketers talk about. Your tone of voice, um,
Mm,
the length of the texts, the complexity
hmm
of the texts,
hmm
and all of these things at once. How many? Say I was this agency. How much of my history do I need? Do I need like 1 million documents of my own? Do I need 10? Like, what do you know about
That's
this?
that's a great question. So uh, when this fine-tuning techniques were first kind of explored by some of the big technology companies and by researchers, they were using hundreds of thousands, or at least tens of thousands of examples. And typically, what they would do was curate and carefully construct all of the fine-tuning examples they gave to the model. Okay, but there was quite a lot of research last year exploring how less can actually be more for fine-tuning. So actually, it was more about the quality than about the quantity. And the true answer to this question is your mileage may vary, and that often more data is better than less data. But there are a number of published research reports and blogs out there where people have shown that they've used a few hundred well crafted examples and got good behavior at the end. So, really, I would say the focus should be on quality, not on quantity. And if
Mhm.
you've just got a few hundred or 1,000 good examples and they're nice and crisp and well articulated and clean, you're probably going to get results from them if you do your fine tuning properly.
Okay, that's interesting. So, well, my long-term goal is to really, do a few hundred of these videos, use the transcriptions to build an AI of myself, so that I can actually interview my guests without being there. I think the
Mm,
problem I would have is probably a quality issue in those transcriptions as a novice interviewer. So, look, anyway, um, let's roll forward one more step. So, a few hundred well-crafted examples may result in some solid fine-tuning and a differentiated model that suits your brand or your company.
that's
When
right.
you
Yeah.
reach the point of having a language model, how I would love to know from you, like, what would be some of the different ways you could even just decide if you've built something good? So I know it's built off the right thing, and I suppose if I tell you as a user, will, so I sometimes generate things on Gen AI, and I'm so stoked that it's quite good. Um,
Mm,
that makes me believe it's completely magic. Whereas what I'm not doing is I'm not an agency doing 5,000 pieces of content for myself or for other clients. So if you went into fine tuning and you wanted this to be a workflow to accelerate your brand or your process, like what would be the ways you could look at the outputs just to figure out if you've even got something that's right or better than
yeah.
something before?
So this is you're touching on a subject which is very close to my heart and which I do an awful lot of, which is data annotation and model evaluation with large language models. I'm going to give you three short answers to this, and we can expand on any one of them if you want. Okay. The first is that when you're actually fine tuning a language model, and this is particularly true if you're hosting your own and fine tuning your own, there are various metrics you can use which might help tell you if the model is actually getting better at producing the kind of outputs you want. So, for example, if you're trying to translate from one language to another, okay, you've presumably got your source and target pairs, and you can actually measure how close the produced translation is to the one you actually wanted. Okay, so it's a computational metric, and you hope to see that declining over time. Great. So that will tell you that the training process is effective. Okay. What it doesn't tell you is that the task was worthwhile at the end necessarily, because these metrics are all very crude. So the only true way to do that is to get humans to evaluate the outputs. Perhaps you could do a before fine tuning and after fine tuning. Or perhaps you could do, and this is something we've done recently, your model versus a state of the art language model. Is yours actually better on the particular defined task that you're trying to fine tune it for? You have to set these evaluation processes up carefully. You have to train people carefully on what they're looking for, and normally build a little bit of software to help you do this. You're essentially presenting people with, here's the context, the situation, the question I gave the language model. Here are the two outputs. Which one do you prefer, or how much would you score each one? And you do that with enough people, well chosen, well trained, in these blind tests, and you can pull together a kind of statistical measure of the output that says, yeah, I'm pretty confident this one is better than that one, or not, as the case may be. So that's the second answer to your question. The third answer to your question is really, why are we building a language model in the first place? Presumably, we're trying to build a better product, a better process, something like that. And there you've got to think about what business metric you are trying to improve at the end. Are you trying to reduce the number of contacts that you have with a customer who has a problem, for example, that a human needs to be in the loop with? So do you actually want to reduce the number of times a human has to engage with a customer by help using a language model to solve 80% of the problems first? There's a different business metric at the end there, which tells you how successful your entire implementation was. And so I'd say think through those three stages of measuring your project and your success. Ultimately, it's the final one that really tells you whether you've succeeded or not.
And let's just pick at that then, Will. So you're saying if it was if it was a chatbot for, I don't know, I wanted to think of a brand that's got a famous screw up involving a chatbot and a customer, but it doesn't spring to mind at the moment. I'll post an image of, there's a few of my favorites that I can't remember. I'll put an image on the screen when we edit this. So you would potentially, it's hard to test in production is where I'm going. It's hard to get some insights while you're building as to the customer response. I suppose it would
Mm,
be a good thing there to sort of go into an experiment, potentially
yeah,
kind of have an application that interacts with customers accessing old language model versus some highly tuned one, and be like, okay, does a customer enter too fewer questions under our new model compared to the model that we had before, and make this a pure comparison like that. So sounds quite complex, but have I understood it correctly?
yeah. Ultimately, that's correct. Ultimately, that's
Yeah.
correct. As data scientists, we tend to focus on things like training measures or training metrics while we're building our models, and we can get myopically focused on these things, trying to drive them up or drive them down. We mustn't lose sight of the fact that the whole reason somebody has paid us to do this is because they want a business outcome. And that outcome is something around efficiencies or something around revenue generation. And we need to know how we're going to measure at the end whether our intervention or our model is a successful addition or replacement of a workflow.
Will, amen to that. Data science for business outcomes. Thank you for taking us through that. All fascinating stuff, and you've teed up a few other points we can use in future. Will, thanks for your support. Ladies and gents, this has been ML's Like Teen Spirit.